morning.
Good morning, Frank. How much time we have?
Your open just started.
Okay, great.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Law Talk. This morning, we're going to be talking about homeschooling in New York State. We are in a situation where we have now more options for schooling our children than we've ever had before. It used to be that you had the option of either sending them to public school, sending them to private school, or homeschooling. And now the state is giving us additional options, at least in our school district here. You're going to be able to do public school 100% online, or you're going to be able to do some kind of a blended model. But the schools, at least in my district, are not opening up 100% for schools for children 5 days a week. So they're having an A-B model where children will attend 2 days a week, Monday and Tuesday one group, Thursday and Friday another group, and Wednesday they're going to deep clean between the groups. So you shouldn't confuse online learning through the school district with homeschooling, even though the children will be at home. The term homeschooling refers to when you take children out of the school district paradigm, out of their control, out of that setting, and you do curriculum at home. Now, there are different ways to do curriculum at home. You can order a curriculum online, you can register your child for an online school, but for homeschooling. But generally speaking, homeschooling is something where you decide the curriculum or what is going to go into the curriculum yourself. The New York State Department of Education has requirements for what the curriculum needs to include, but you can set it up yourself as far as how that curriculum will teach what needs to be taught. So, parents in New York State, or people who are what they call in parental relation to children, so that means you have custody of them, you have guardianship of them, you are the person who decides what this child does and does not do. You go ahead and you make that decision. So, let's say you've decided to homeschool, whether it's because you do not agree with everything that the school is teaching or the way that they're teaching it, or you have pandemic concerns about your children either becoming sick or exposing someone in your family when they come home. Whatever your reason is, you don't need to have a reason that the state approves of in New York, because in New York State, unlike driving and a lot of other things the government is involved in, you have a right to homeschool your children. It is not something you need to get permission to do. For example, for driving, you need to get a driver's license. But for homeschooling, you don't need to have a teacher's license. You can be a person who is anybody at all who's in parental relationship with your children, and you can homeschool them. But like driving, there are rules of the road for homeschooling. You just can't keep them home and let them, quote unquote, experience life or whatever. There are all kinds of rules and regulations for homeschooling. So we're going to go over what most of them are, although this is not a 100% complete guide, and you really need to go to the New York State Department of Education website, or if you're listening from Pennsylvania, go to their website, their Department of Education website, and you can learn how to do this. But the fact is, at least in my district, children will be home, whether you like it or not. They'll be home 3 out of 5 of what used to be considered school days. So you're going to have them in your house for a while, learning online at least a little bit. So here we go. If you decide you don't like the blended model, or maybe you don't like, a lot of parents don't like the Common Core, don't like the new math in the Common Core, you're still going to have to teach math, but you don't have to teach it the way the school district has it set up to be taught. You may still have to teach about evolution, but if that does not match with your religious faith, you can also teach other things that they're not allowed to teach in the public schools. So, for example, while you're presenting evolution, and you should present it correctly as the theory that it is and explain the theory, you can also explain that in your house you believe something different, and then go ahead and teach whatever it is that you believe. And that's okay. That's okay for homeschooling. It is not okay in the public schools. So there's a lot of advantages to homeschooling. The major disadvantage, obviously, is that it takes a lot of time on someone's part to get this done. So you're going to have to really make a commitment to do this and to get her done. So if you want to homeschool your children, the first thing that you need to do, and again, this isn't the online schooling, although they will also want written notice for that. But when you're homeschooling, when you're going to set up your own curriculum for the children, you need to write a letter of intent to the school district. Now, in New York State, the first time you do the letter of intent, it has to be within 14 days of starting homeschooling. So you don't even have to let them know in advance. But I'm going to recommend you let them know as soon as you make the decision. So you send them a letter saying, dear whatever school district people, whoever it is that you would send it to, the superintendent or the school board or whoever it is that your local district advises you to send it to. And you send them written notice stating, I'm going to keep my child in homeschooling this year, and you name your child and their birth date and everything else, and just let them know that this child will be homeschooled this year. In subsequent years, if you're going to continue homeschooling, you need to let them know by July 1st. So you should certainly know if you've homeschooled the last year. They give you a month to think about whether or not you're going to do it again the next year. And so you need to let them know by July 1st, am I homeschooling in the coming year if you've already been homeschooling? So they give you a deadline. But the first time that you do it, there's not a deadline except within 14 days of beginning the homeschooling. But really, with everything that's going on in the school districts, and the school districts are scrambling to figure out how they're going to help children learn in this age of COVID-19, what you need to do, I would suggest, is that you go ahead and that you let them know that you're going to be homeschooling so that they aren't blindsided by this, so they know that they don't have to make plans for your child because you're already making plans for your child. Now, the Board of Regents has made all kinds of exceptions, modifications, new flexibility for the public school districts for COVID-19 as far as reporting requirements and the way they have to teach things. And certainly many of us noticed during the pandemic timeframe last spring that schooling was less than we expected. They just weren't set up for it. They didn't seem to be prepared, changing their minds. And schools were required to have plans for situations like this, but the plans didn't seem to be implementable in the way that maybe they hoped that they would be. And so one of the things that the schools are going to have to do if they're planning on having children learn 3 days a week at home is make sure everyone has internet. So it's really interesting for me to see how are they going to make sure that families who can't afford internet have internet for their children's homeschooling, or if they're going to do it in some alternative way, like sending paperwork home. So the Board of Regents has made these exceptions. They're changing the flexibility about the day. They're changing how often reporting requirements are. But for homeschooling, the requirements were always pretty easy to meet. Now, when I say easy, I don't mean they weren't time consuming, because they're very time consuming. But you can meet them easily. They make it very clear on the New York State Department of Education website what it is that you need to do, when you need to do it. For example, you need to make quarterly filings. So they tell you how to make them, where to make them. And there are some homeschool requirements in New York State that seem a little silly. For example, you have to take attendance. So you have to verify that your child is home for homeschooling. But the attendance requirement, there is no exception for homeschooling. So every morning, you're going to have to, now you don't actually have to call out your child's name and have them say here, but you do have to keep a record that your child did school that day, basically. So you're going to have to say, okay, these were the days of the week, and you have to have as many days of school, et cetera, and as many hours of learning instruction as they want you to have. The beauty is, though, that there's a lot of flexibility about learning instruction. So we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and talk about that in a couple of minutes.
We'll be right back with Law Talk here on the Patriot. All right.
Can you hear me okay, Frank?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, good.
Just so you know, I never thought to tell you this. I actually I go to break a few minutes early for Law Talk. You're good to call. You don't have to wait right until 9. Yeah, maybe your schedule is like that, but feel free to call in 4 or 5 minutes in advance if you want.
Okay, I just didn't want to interrupt your show.
No, you won't. I wouldn't take calls within the last 5 minutes of the hour anyway, because I want to run late. So
okay.
if I see my phone ringing anywhere around 8:55, I'm not going to pick up, and I'll assume it's you.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so for everyone who's watching on Facebook, I can't see myself normally when I'm
Oh, I
live
saw
streaming.
it. I just saw it.
Oh, you saw it? Okay.
I
All
was
right.
scrolling through to see if I could find it because I know you said that you were going to do it on Facebook, and I saw it. Yep.
Okay, good. Because I can't see myself, and normally I can see myself, and I don't know what change they've made now, but I can't see myself while I'm live streaming. Okay, thank you.
I try to check every time now to see.
Okay.
All right, we're rejoin's just about to start. Okay, and I'll let you know when to go.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, go ahead.
So thank you, and welcome back to Law Talk. And we're talking about the requirements that the New York State Department of Education has for homeschooling in New York State. And one of the first requirements I talked about was attendance. So you have to take attendance and verify that your child had homeschooling instruction on that day, whatever the day is. Another thing that we want to talk about as far as attendance goes is your child is required to attend school between the ages of 6 and 16. So if you're homeschooling, you can actually accelerate your child's learning so that they are done with high school by the time they're 16. The requirement is that they have a certain number of hours, but you can actually condense that. You can look on the website for how to skip a grade if your child is capable of doing advanced grade work. So there are all kinds of things that you can do to get your child out of school by the time they're 16 without actually having them drop out of high school, but having a homeschooling diploma, and then they can go to work or to college, assuming the college takes them. But most of them do. If they have a diploma and they've learned the content, most colleges will take 16-year-olds. And sometimes, in extraordinary circumstances, they'll take even younger children who have learned. And so there's no reason to slow your child's learning down. For example, you can let them work at their own pace, and as long as they have the hours that the law requires and the content that the law requires, then you can advance them through the grades more quickly than would happen. And as we know in public schools, often what happens is that the class moves at a pace that is too slow for some of the children who have already read the textbook in the first month of school. And so sometimes the children who are more advanced learners like that can wind up getting into trouble because they are bored, because they're just bored out of their minds. So they do things that maybe they shouldn't be doing. So homeschooling can be advantageous for that. So first you have to notify the school district that you're going to do this. The next thing you have to do is have an individual home instruction plan. Now, again, this isn't if you're homeschooling as in the school district is doing online learning. That is not homeschooling. That is a new option that we're being given, but your child is still a student of the public school. We're talking about homeschooling where you are figuring out how your child is going to learn things the New York State Department of Education requires them to learn. So you're going to have to do an individual home instruction plans. So within 10 days of receiving your letter of intent, the school district is required to send you a copy of the homeschool regulations and individual homeschool instruction plan for each child that you'll be homeschooling. So they have something that they will send you that will tell you what's required, and they are required to do that. And again, you don't have to give them a reason for homeschooling. You don't have to say, this is why I'm doing it. Your child doesn't have to have some sort of difficulty. You don't have to make religious exception reasons. You do not have to explain. You have a right to homeschool your children. So you just need to let the district know you're going to do that. They will send you the individual home instruction plan and the regulations. Now, you have to fill out this individual home instruction plan for each child and send it back to the school within 4 weeks of receiving it. Now, again, that's the first year. It's flexible to within 4 weeks of receiving it. But in subsequent years, just like you have to let them know you're going to homeschool by July 1st in subsequent years, you have to have your individual education plan ready for them by August 15th. So the plan that you have to do, the individual home instruction plan, or IHIP it's called, because they have a name for everything like that. You have to have that in by August 15th so that the school has a chance to review it and make sure that it meets New York State Department of Education guidelines. You want that plan to be boring for the school. You don't want to, if you're going to explain every detail of the curriculum, first of all, they don't want to read all of that. The other thing is you just want to put in the information that they need. okay? And it's got to be true, and it's got to be what you're going to do, and you've got to be complying with the law. But if you are choosing to teach your children, about history through good documentaries that are available on YouTube, it doesn't matter that you're doing it that way. It just matters that it's getting done. That these, so your documentary should be a reliable source. When you're teaching about the pyramids, it doesn't hurt to mention that some people think the pyramids were built by ancient aliens, but that shouldn't be the only thing you're teaching your children. So you'll want to make sure that you are doing all of that correctly. But you can be very flexible about how you're going to teach it, and you don't need to go into that detail. So you can just go ahead and say, this is what we're going to teach, but you don't need to go into the detail of how you're going to teach it. And like I said, you want your plan to be boring to the person who's reading it. You don't want to put in anything exciting there. You're not trying to impress them with your dynamic new educational theories. All that's for is to assure them that you are going to teach them what the school and the law requires it to be taught. Then you have to follow up with quarterly reports. So you have to each school quarter, you have to let them know what it is that you have done. So you will send in your attendance records, you will send in the curriculum that was completed, you will let them know whether or not you actually did all of the work or completed everything that you planned on completing. And this is for each child. So it's really good to keep those records as you go along, just kind of check the boxes. And then when it's time to send in your quarterly report, it's already done because you've been doing it on a daily basis. And if you did not have an opportunity to meet all of the hours that are supposed to be met, for example, maybe your child does come down with COVID-19, or maybe you do, and you just can't do anything for 2 weeks. You will need to explain that to them. That is an area where you will need to give an explanation, because you are required to do the instruction. You're required to do a certain number of hours of instruction. So you'll have to explain to them why it didn't happen if it didn't happen. And if too much doesn't happen over too long a period of time, just like parents who don't send their children to public school, you can be charged with educational neglect. Now, I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm just saying that if you want to homeschool your children, you need to do it right. And if there are bona fide reasons why things can't be done the way the Department of Education says they need to be done, that can be okay as long as you're making up the time. So another great thing about homeschooling is that we have our children, especially our teenagers, getting up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and studies show that teenagers really need more sleep than that. You can let them sleep in. You can start your homeschool day at noon. You can start it whenever you want to. There's a certain number of hours that are required, but when those hours occur, there's no requirement. You just have to make sure that you get it in. So it doesn't have to be 5 days a week. It can be in fewer days a week, or a little bit every day. Whatever it is that you choose to do and works for your family, you can do that. So those are the things that you need to keep in mind. Now, there are coursework requirements that you have to do, and we'll go over that in a little bit. Um, the requirements, the qualifications, again, you don't have to be a teacher, you don't have to be licensed. It only requires that a person be a legal parent or guardian of the children. So whether you have custody, whether you have guardianship, or whether you're their natural or adoptive parent, you can homeschool. That is the qualification. That is the only qualification for homeschooling. So in other words, you can do this, but the idea of having your oldest child teach the other children, and I'm not saying they can't present a report or do something else like that as would be done in a normal classroom, but you cannot delegate the responsibility for homeschooling or the day-to-day teaching to someone who is not a parent, a guardian, or other person. And looks like we got to take another break. How much time do we have for the last segment?
What's that?
How much time is there for the last segment?
We'll have about 7.5.
Okay.
No, probably have close to 8.
Okay. How we doing, Frank?
Give about 30 seconds.
Okay. My cat is coming in to help. One of my cats.
All right, your rejoin's just about to start. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, and welcome back to Law Talk. This is our third and final segment today. And I wanted to start out by telling you some of the things that you do not have to do as a homeschooling parent. If you are an anti vaxxer, and I am not on board with that, I'm not advocating being an anti vaxxer, but I'm just saying if you are, homeschool children are not required to get vaccinated. The rational basis for the government requiring vaccinations of school age children is that they not get the other children or the teachers sick. So if you are not vaccinating your children, and then you are going to homeschool them, that's okay. You don't have to vaccinate children who are homeschooled. So I just thought I would throw that in there and mention it. It is something that is very important to some people, and really the only legal way to do it is to homeschool your children. So we have to teach each of the four additional subjects that I'm going to list in grades K through 12, and it has to be taught every single year. So every year you have to teach patriotism and citizenship. You have to teach health education, alcohol, drug, and tobacco misuse. You have to teach highway safety and traffic regulations, including bicycle safety and fire and arson prevention and safety. And you have to teach that every single year. Now, in grades 1 through 6, now this is interesting because this is for homeschooling. We all know that there have been certain public schools that have dropped art or dropped music, and they can get waivers from the education department. But if you are homeschooling, this is what you need to do. All right. So, grades 1 to 6, math, reading, spelling, writing, the English language, geography, United States history, science, health education, music, visual arts, physical education, and bilingual education or English as a second language if needed. So if you're homeschooling and your child does not speak English as a first language, you will have to teach the bilingual English as a first language so that they can communicate with others. Because English, although it is not the required language anywhere in our nation, it is the predominant language, and we expect people to be able to communicate in it for their ability to learn and get a job. So the following things have to be taught at least once during grades 1 through 8. So these are not every year, but these are things that need to be taught at least once. And again, just so you know what they are, in case you came in a little late, they are um, patriotism and citizenship, health education, alcohol, drug, and tobacco misuse, highway safety and traffic regulations, including bicycle safety, and fire and arson prevention and safety. So, I mean, arson prevention, don't set anything on fire, but I digress. Anyway, there are a certain number of hours, as I mentioned, that you need to teach things to children. So for grades 7 and 8, English, 216 hours a year, history and geography, 216 hours a year, science, 216 hours, math, 216 hours, physical education regularly. So that just means regularly. It doesn't have a particular number of hours. Health education regularly. So, what you can do for physical education and health education is get your child involved in a sport or activity, and then also, in addition, give them some regular health or physical education, some reading materials, some instruction in that way. Art, 54 hours, music, 54 hours, practical arts like cooking, building things, you have to do that regularly, and library skills regularly. And that's interesting because who uses a library? We all Google. But if you're homeschooling, you've got to teach those library skills on a regular basis. For grades 9 through 12, the hours below our school year, English, 432 hours a year. Social studies, which includes American history, participation in government and economics, 432 hours a year. Math, 216 hours a year. Science, 216 hours. Art and music, 108 hours. Health education, 54 hours. Physical education, 216 hours. And then 324 hours of electives. Now, those are the things that you have to teach, but you can also teach religious instruction. You can teach basically, how to fly an airplane, anything you want to put in your curriculum that you want to require for your child. you can teach that too, and you can require your child to learn it. Isn't that fun? So, these are the things that the government is requiring you to teach and for your children to have exposure to, but you can add things. Now, the New York homeschool law again requires you to keep a record of your child's attendance throughout the year. And they can ask to see the attendance records at any time. So, if you get a knock on the door from a truant officer and says, "We want to see your child's attendance records," you have to produce them. Those are something that you do have to hold accountable. The children are required to be educated, and you are required to prove that you are educating them. So if they want to see your attendance records, you have to have your attendance records available for them. You also want to keep a copy of that letter of intent that you wrote to the school, your IHIP, your individual education plan for your child, your quarterly reports, and a copy of your child's yearly test scores or academic evaluations. Now, that's another thing that has to be done for homeschooling. Your children do have to be tested to show that they are learning as well as being schooled. So you have to record this yearly test by June 30th every year. So there are different ways you can do this. You can choose from the Iowa test, the California test, the Stanford Achievement Test, and the website has a list of tests you can have your children take. You can have them administered by the local public school when they're testing everyone else, a registered non-public school, a private school that does these tests, a professional staff member from a private school or a public school if they're willing to come to your home and do that. And any other location that you choose, as long as it's a certified teacher or professional administering that test. And your child has to score above the 33rd percentile or show by their score that they've grown academically, because we understand some children are not capable of scoring above the 33rd percentile. So if they're in that category, if they have some sort of educational delay or difficulty, and they're not scoring above the 33rd percentile, you have to show that they've learned enough since last year to show that your educational program is sufficient for them. So for children who are in grades 1 to 3 and every other year for children in grades 4 to 8, because they want to catch them early, you do have an alternative testing option. You can choose to have your child evaluated instead of tested. And by evaluating, that means that a New York State certified teacher, a home instruction peer group review panel, which we don't have time to go in here, but you and other homeschoolers can set one of those up so that you are part of that review panel, or someone chosen by the parent and permitted by the superintendent who has interviewed your child and reviewed a portfolio of their schoolwork. So you have to have a portfolio of their schoolwork. They have to interview the child and be satisfied that this child is actually learning if you want to do that instead of taking the standardized test. But again, this is only good up till 8th grade. And we are out of time. So that's Law Talk. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Everybody, thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
That went quick.
It really did. Good topic.
Good job. So I'll talk to you next week.
Okay, talk to you next week.